In your testimony, you talk about the need to develop our domestic manufacturing capacity for renewable energy hardware and equipment, as you were just talking about. You state that it is vital to act on the Biden administration's 100-day supply chain review report and onshore renewables manufacturing. I agree with you. And that's why I supported the bipartisan infrastructure law. And that is why President Biden invoked the Defense Production Act to encourage domestic production of battery materials. Thanks to the Biden administration, we'll also soon break ground on wind farms off the coast of Long Island, and you mentioned that before, that will power as many as 2 million homes. Can you expand on the importance of onshoring renewables manufacturing so projects like these can be built with American technology and labor?
Congresswoman, it is so important to do this because China is in a race to get a lock on these critical supply chains. Everything from the rare earths and other minerals that go into the manufacturing process, as well as the separation from ore and the refinement of those materials. We don't have the capacity anymore in the United States. The one U.S. mining company for rare earths is 10% owned by the Chinese. How can that make any sense? So we are really very far behind in securing the upstream components to renewable energy, as well as the manufacturing, as you've mentioned. And that's going to take, I think, an element of economic statecraft, some significant investment, because as I mentioned in my statement for the record, we've just been complacent for too long. And we risk, again, trading energy dependence of one form for energy dependence of a new form and doing it to the Chinese Communist Party.
In your testimony, you said that it makes no sense to cancel the Keystone XL while greenlighting Nord Stream 2. Could you explain a little bit more on that?
Well, what happened is, we denied Canada access to our market. And of course, what's Canada going to do? They're going to have to sell oil elsewhere, maybe to China, for example, which would give China maybe more power over Canada's economy. And then, of course, we enabled the coercive power of the Kremlin over Germany, which is importing 51% of its gas and 41% of its oil from Russia. This is why the European Union will not impose a hydrocarbon embargo on Russia, even as they're committing mass murder of innocent people in Ukraine. So it was an extremely poor decision that ran counter to our national security interests. And again, this is why energy security and national security policies must be integrated and compatible with one another.
Thanks. I want to ask you another question. Talking about, you said in renewables, we're still going to be dependent on supply chains in foreign countries. It's reportedly that we left $3 trillion in critical minerals in Afghanistan. We left them in the hands of the Taliban and their new friends, the Chinese. Would you comment on that?
Congressman, the competition with China occurs in places outside of the Indo-Pacific region. And in this case, you're pointing out how important South Asia is, but I would say it cuts across the Middle East, it cuts across Africa. And it's really important for us to recognize the importance now of resilient supply chains, especially those associated with renewable energy and energy transition. Of course, an electric car, I don't know how many magnets, I forget, is an electric car, but it's a lot. And then, of course, battery manufacturing, magnet manufacturing, the whole upstream supply associated with rare earths and other critical minerals and the separation from ore, all of that has to be resilient. And the only way we're going to get there is with onshoring and nearshoring. And that's really, I think, has to be a major focus of this committee and the Congress, as well as the Biden administration.
General McMaster, you mentioned in your testimony that authoritarian governments use their power over energy supplies to coerce opponents. The Biden administration, in my view, is playing right into Russia and China's hands by pursuing restrictive energy policies and attempting to negotiate with dictators in Iran and Venezuela for oil rather than producing American energy and getting our country back to pre-Biden administration energy dominance, where we were net exporters of energy. And some of this may be ground that's been covered, but General, could you explain what is at stake if the United States were to continue down this road and become irreversibly dependent upon adversaries like China, Russia, and Iran to meet our energy needs?
Congressman, thank you. Well, we all live and learn. So I'm hoping that the Biden administration, all of us will learn from Russia's use of energy for coercive purposes. That we should learn, obviously, our lesson in terms of investing in our own production and export, which can help satisfy global demand and do so in a way that redounds to our benefit in terms of security and prosperity in the world broadly. But also, as I think you're alluding to, the danger associated with becoming over-reliant on supply chains that go through China, especially those connected to renewables. Renewables associated with with solar and wind power and the hardware and equipment, but also the manufacturing of electric cars and the batteries that go into them and the magnets that go into them, as well as the minerals and various materials. So I think and by the way, the oil that goes into them in the form of plastics. I think every electric car is about 1/3 made out of petroleum products. So it's important for us, I think, to recognize that we have an opportunity. And, of course, I don't want to lay blame on anybody at this stage. As long as we learn our lesson and we change the policies, we relax the regulations and the permitting, and be able to take advantage of the great promise of our tremendous natural resources here and American innovation and ingenuity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm particularly concerned about China's situation and their strong position in the renewables market, as you just mentioned, especially as we have a rush to green energy agenda while still discouraging mining of critical minerals and energy production in the United States. So, I mean, I think you did touch on this by pursuing this rush to green without shoring up domestic mining and processing capabilities, particularly for our battery situation. Are we simply going to create a dependency on China for renewables that will echo our dependency on Middle Eastern oil in the 1970s?
Congressman, I think that's exactly the danger. There's been some good work done on this at the Hudson Institute by Dr. Nadia Shallow that I'd recommend, that shows really how vulnerable we are to these supply chains that are vulnerable because they're overly dependent on China.
Yeah.
I also think it's real interesting that Biden, when asked, one of his answers to the high price of gas was, well, buy an electric car. Buy an electric car. Well, first of all, electric cars are very expensive, and so not everybody can afford one, but electric cars and renewable energy require a lot of critical minerals, and a lot of those critical minerals are actually processed in China. And so, for instance, wind turbines, solar panels, they all require critical materials. Electric cars require 4 times the amount of copper than do a standard car. Yet, President Biden has closed down mines. There's a mine in Arizona called Resolution Copper Mine. Under the Trump administration, it was given the green light to go ahead and continue mining. When Biden was in office, after 2 months, he closed it down, couldn't mine. I went to visit there, and that mine would produce 25% of all of the copper that is consumed in the United States, including for electric vehicles.
And here in the south of the United States, the Biden administration is pushing us away from fossil fuels. Can you explain how this plays into the hands of communist China?
Well, it plays in the hands of China because we cannot meet global energy demands without the U.S. being really a major player in the global energy market in the area of hydrocarbons, and I would say in natural gas in particular. But then also trying to jump ahead to renewables before renewables are economically viable in terms of developing economies puts China in a position of control where China can restrict access to renewable sources of energy and gain coercive power over us that is reminiscent of U.S. dependency on Middle Eastern oil in the 1970s.
Which brings me back to my point that I like to bring up all the time, and something I said earlier, that American energy independence brings global stabilization. Sitting on HPSI, I have a opportunity to visit with a lot of our allies around the world, and they will tell you the same thing. They would rather buy oil from a friendly country like ours than to be dependent on buying oil from a country they know would rather take them down than see them succeed. So once again, global stabilization happens when we have energy independence from America.